Data science doesn't need some agile methodology. For the most part, they're a mixture of common sense combined with some mystical nonsense to give an exotic edge, typically to sell books, training, courses, and consultancy. I don't see agile as being beneficial to analytics teams. You'll spend the entire time trying to plan for a sprint only to have it blow up midway through because something unexpected happened. In the end, you'll end up having more meetings that waste more time than necessary. We use Agile. It's complete overkill for reporting, but the powers that be do love their paperwork. Agile is the bane of my existence, especially in projects where there's lots of unknowns. It really depends on the project manager. Some have no knowledge of tech and focus way too much on the board and burn down charts and add a lot of unneeded stress. Agile is an odd thing, isn't it? A lot of people hate it for the very reasons it's supposed to solve for. It also says something when there's an entire Agile industry designed for the sole purpose of making the software industry suck less. And then for that industry to get twisted into causing as much irritation as the software industry did in the first place. So what was Agile supposed to solve? Well, early on, software development was run sort of like a factory line. Managers thought you could just put out a deadline and the software would magically be done at that time. And that, like hardware, so long as you have a good blueprint going in, the construction would be seamless and predictable. But that's not how software works, and so you had angry managers and developers who were treated like factory workers. And no offense to any factory workers, you should also not be treated poorly. So along came the Agilists, who said, hey, that's not how any of this works. Here's Scrum, use this framework and get rid of deadlines and treat people like they're intelligent humans. Managers around the world rejoiced and said, okay, we're doing Scrum now, except we're keeping the deadlines and we're definitely not going to give developers free thought. And for some reason, Scrum doesn't work. So what really is this complex magic that is Agile? It's like three things. There's transparency. You have a board that nobody ever looks at. There's inspection. Your work is reviewed in chunks instead of waiting until the very end, except that nobody wants to QA, so they don't really check if anything's right. And then adaptation, which is hard to do when the inspections are delayed. So when we talk about Scrum, we're basically talking about those three Agile principles and a sprint. And a sprint is basically just a 2-week time block. Why do we use 2 weeks? Because it's just an arbitrary amount of time that if we go longer than 2 weeks, it's a long time to get feedback. And if we go shorter than 2 weeks, there's no time to get anything complicated done. And we use a time block just so that we have some sort of schedule to do things over and over again. We can have our planning, we can have our demos, we can get things delivered, and we can repeat the process. I've worked with some developers who like this. If you're a procrastinator, having some sort of deadline every 2 weeks can kind of help you get things done. If you're not a procrastinator, you could theoretically pull more work in than nobody ever does. There's a saying that the work will take up the time allotted for it. So pretty much everything's going to take a 2-week sprint because you have 2 weeks to do it. They're really supposed to be an escape from deadlines. A feature will take an unknown number of sprints, but bit by bit, a little bit will get done each sprint until finally it's complete. The problem is, in most Scrum implementations, deadlines are just baked into the sprints. They say, oh, well, this feature will be done in 3 sprints. But what happens if after sprint 1, you do an inspection and you learn that you did everything wrong and you need to start from scratch? Well, it's still going to take potentially 6 weeks, but now you only have 4 to do it because it was promised at the end of sprint 3. And for analytics, it gets even more interesting because we have a problem with the cadence of 2 weeks. It's generally way too long for reporting. If you have an ad hoc report, you can probably get it done, get it out pretty quick. But it's usually way too short for data science or big analytics projects, which can take months to gather data and months to analyze the data, and then months to see what the predictions will come out as. And then there's the interruptions in analytics, and oh God, do we have interruptions. Data analytics is based a lot on we need knowledge now, we need data today. So in addition to your planned work, you have constant ad hoc requests for data analysis or checking the numbers or some other things that come up in day-to-day work. And if you're attempting to do sprints, which should be pretty much locked in for 2 weeks, it's going to blow them up and you're not going to finish anything you plan to. So that leads us to Kanban. Kanban is another framework. So just like Scrum is an Agile framework, Kanban is another Agile framework. So in Kanban, you're not going to do sprints. You don't have a defined work period. You just have a list of items that are prioritized top to bottom. And when you need work, you pull the first card out and you start working on it. And then there are something called WIPs, which is work in progress limits, which limit how many items can be in progress at a time. This is to prevent you from having a list of 50 items to do and you take all 50 of them and start working on them. Because if you do that, your time is going to be split between 50 items and nothing will ever get done. So the idea is high priority card, you take it, you work it through to the end, then you take the next card, and so on. That way things actually get done in a timely manner. The advantage here is it handles unplanned work a lot better. So just like support teams, any ad hoc requests can work well. So let's say your first priority is a new report item that expect will take a week to do. You get started on that, and then some ad hoc request comes in. They throw it on the board. That becomes the new high priority item. You grab that one and just work it through because it's like an hour-long interruption, not going to derail your whole plan. And then you go back to the report and work on that. And then you just sort of deal with your interruptions as they come in. Of course, if you have too many ad hoc interruptions, that report might take a year to get done, but at least it'll be visible on a board to inspection of, hey, why isn't this report getting done? You can point to the 500 ad hoc requests that came in this week to show why you sort of got delayed. Those are probably the two most popular frameworks of Agile today. Personally, I like Kanban better because I think it handles a variety of work better. It can handle ad hoc, it can handle things that would fit in a sprint, and it can handle longer term projects that will go for a while. You can kind of label each one and, have different WIP limits based on the complexity of the work in your queue. But sprints can also be really good for teams that don't have a lot of interruptions and have work that can fit into a sprint because it kind of gives you some timelines and a lot more planning and discussion around how long things should take. So if you have a lot of junior developers, it can be really helpful for them to get that discussion and that planning. Another thing in Agile you hear a lot about is the estimations, the story points, the Fibonacci sequence, the small, medium, larges. And really the thing to remember is that estimating is useless. It's really, really hard to guess how long something will take. Unless something's been done a lot before, in which case you probably also don't need to estimate it because you know how long it's going to take. Anything you haven't done before, it's just a random guess anyway. So a lot of people in the Agile world argue for no estimation Agile, in which case you just sort of ask the question, does it fit in a sprint? Yes or no? And then you move on. If it doesn't fit in a sprint, you need to break it down a little more into chunks that could fit in a sprint. And if it does fit in a sprint, you put it in the sprint. And then most experienced teams can just eyeball what's in a sprint and say, this is too much work, this is too little work. And over time, you'll get better at it. Spending the time trying to point out how much something will take when it's going to take different developers, different durations, and different people have ideas of what a story point is just a giant waste of time. But a lot of companies will do it because they do Scrum and Scrum says to do it. And they don't really put much thought into why they're doing things. So they have you story point stuff. But it's even more useless for data science because half the time we don't even know what we're going to be getting into until we're into it. So trying to put an estimation on how long it'll take to build a prediction for something without even looking at it first is kind of ridiculous. So one thing people don't know is that Agile was supposed to reduce the amount of meetings we have so that we have more time to develop. So for example, all of your planning would be done in the sprint planning meeting instead of spread throughout a dozen meetings throughout the week. But instead, the Scrum meetings mostly just get added on top of all those other meetings. And that's because a lot of people have jobs that revolve around going to meetings, so they can't really cancel all of those or they won't have anything to do. So you'll get to sit in more and more meetings. So one of the big advantages I've always liked about Agile is it lets you know what you're going to be working on for the day. I feel like I just need that to get anything accomplished. Whether you're doing Scrum or Kanban, ideally, you should know, oh, tomorrow, this is going to be the thing I'm focused on. This is the one thing I need to do, which is interesting because for YouTube, I do exactly that. I have a plan of on Friday, I want to edit a video. On Saturday, I want to record a video. I kind of just have an idea of what I want to do and when I'm going to do it. And because of that, I'm far more productive than at my actual day job. I probably get more done in 2 hours working on YouTube than I do in 8 hours of my day job. And that's just because I know what I'm going to do when I sit down to work on videos. Instead of starting my day, opening my email, seeing what came up, having an idea of the thing I want to work on, but there's somebody messages me and I need to go look at something else. And then there's a meeting and then I get sidetracked. And then there's something else comes up. And then finally it's 4 o'clock and I haven't really done that one thing I was planning on doing for the day. Whereas if you were actually doing Kanban the way it should be, you would have your top priority item. You'd come in on your day. That's what you would start working on. And when you finish that, you would go to the next item. So when I do Kanban, it's far more productive than when I don't. Another thing that really annoys me with the common implementation of Scrum is the boards people set up. There's supposed to be a limited admin overhead of Scrum or Kanban. Agile in general is supposed to sort of organize all of the administrative of running a team. But instead, you get these like Jira boards that have 5,000 fields you're supposed to fill out on a card that's going to take you 15 minutes to accomplish. Which is why you get those comments about all the paperwork of Agile. It feels like a lot of documentation for no reason. Not the good kind of documentation about why your code does what it does, but just sort of overhead administrative documentation. And you probably could have just gotten more work done if you hadn't filled out all of these Jira cards. And it really doesn't have to be that way. I've set up Jira myself, and you can highlight a handful of critical fields and automate half of it, and developers could spend almost no time creating cards for their work. And that really just annoys me as a data person because collecting heaps of data is not ideal. You want to target what the useful data is and collect just that. And that kind of leads to the problem of metrics, which is another common complaint of Scrum, is that it's all about, burn downs and velocities and really not the point. The purpose of metrics in Agile is really to highlight the pain points. If you have a Kanban board, you can track throughput and show that everything is choking up in the QA lane because there's not enough people QAing the work. So it's really not on the development team. It's on the fact that users aren't reviewing the things they're asking for. But since a lot of time the metrics are tied to performance reviews and company bonuses and things like that, they get sort of manipulated and no longer used for their true purpose of highlighting issues and solving those issues. They just either get swept under the rug or they get used as a stick to beat people with, which again, as a data person, is just very offensive. So sometimes I talk bad about Agile, but I really do like it. It's a natural way for me to work. It's just most implementations are just awful and miss the point. And it's a very corporatized thing now of people want to implement Scrum, so they go through Scrum training, and nobody really thinks about what problems it's trying to solve. They just sort of try to implement it so they can say, look at us, we're a Scrum team. So I guess if you're trying to run a data team or you're trying to improve your data team, I guess those are the big takeaways, is that just focus on the core concepts of Agile. Imagine how you work through your own things day to day. Do you have a list of chores you want to get done on the weekend? And then you probably just pick the high priority one and do it. Agile's pretty much the same exact thing as that. All the other complications are only helpful if you find them helpful. You don't just have to do it because Scrum Book says so. Really, the important things to remember are track metrics that are actually useful and highlight problems. Let developers know what the one useful thing for them to accomplish in the day is, and then let them do it. Please have fewer meetings. Know what your high priority items are. And then just trust developers to know how to get their work done. So that's my rant on Scrum. Be sure to check out this video on data requirements, so when you do inspection and adaptation, you can get a lot more out of your user stories.